Deer Park, Battleground, Tea Party, and Convention Cities.
Good. Mike Jenkins, Lester.
Jerry Dudley, treasurer forever.
Mary Huls, Clear Lake Tea Party.
Trevor Gordon.
Watch us for the term limits.
We did.
Amanda Murray Alvin.
Zach Griffin, Clear Lake Tea Party. My mom, Joe, Clear Lake Tea Party.
Sandy Hammers has the district captain for Texas has the district one meeting.
All right.
Billy Lee, Cypress, regional captain, Southeast Texas, Convention States, statewide grassroots group.
And we have a couple of new arrivals. We're just saying our name and where we're from. If you'd like to say your name and where you're from. Ma'am? All right, thank you very much. All right, you want to switch slides? Okay, what is an Article 5 convention? This right up here is what's written in our Constitution. Basically, Article 5 provides two avenues to propose amendments to the Constitution. The House of Representatives and the Senate, by 2/3 majority vote, can propose an amendment for state ratification. With the House, that'd be 290, and the Senate would be 67. Or we can have 2/3 of the state legislatures call for a convention to propose amendments. That would be 34 states. Back when the Constitution was first ratified, it would only take 9 states to call for a constitutional convention. The wording of Article 5 makes it clear that only Congress can call an actual convention upon the legal application of 34 state legislatures. For congressionally approved amendments or amendments resulting from an Article 5 convention, Article 5 requires that 3/4 of the states, 38, to ratify the proposed amendments for adoption to our Constitution. Article 5 also provides for two methods of ratification. One, the state legislatures must vote and pass the proposed amendment, or each state can hold a ratifying convention in lieu of a state legislature vote. Note that the Congress gets to decide which manner of ratification must be pursued. Article 5 also states that amendments cannot be made to the Constitution before 1808 regarding the first and fourth clauses of Article 1, Section 9, and these are: Clause 1 prohibited the Congress from banning the importation of slaves before 1808, and Clause 4 prohibited Congress from directly taxing the people, which was changed later by the 16th Amendment of 1913, allowing for a federal income tax. So those were the only two prohibitions against Article 5 as was written in the Constitution. Okay, here we go. Who's pushing Article 5 conventions? Well, obviously that's been kicked around a long time. Within the last 2 years, there have been various calls for Article 5 convention. Most notably, Mark Levin, Governor Abbott, and the Republican Party of Texas have all sounded a call for states to support Article 5 convention. However, the real push for Article 5 convention in Texas can be attributed to Governor Abbott. He first released his Texas plan, which was 92 pages, on January 8, 2016, and he followed this up with a book called Broken But Unbound, where he further called for an Article 5 convention as the solution to fix federal government. Governor Abbott is clearly the main reason that Article 5 convention has become so prominent in state Republican circles. With Governor Abbott calling for an Article 5 convention, it makes it a legislative priority. The vast majority of the establishment Republicans began pushing this at the RPT convention. I've been to several conventions here in the state of Texas, and I've never heard the call for an Article 5 convention more so than I heard this last time. Where people that the establishment Republicans that I've been fighting since I got in the Tea Party, all of a sudden are all on for Article 5. It's like, well, what's going on? That's because the top, Governor Abbott, has called for it, and he is pushing this as his plan, his book, etc. The Republican platform, Article 5 planks, number 35 and number 264, which is our legislative priorities, received 81% approval during the convention in Dallas. So the vast majority of the Republican grassroots that were convention delegates, they overwhelmingly support an Article 5 convention. Next slide, please. Liberty amendments and the Texas Plan amendments. So when we start talking about the calls for an Article 5 convention, it's like, well, what exactly are we calling for? Mark Levin wrote the Liberty amendments in his book. He put 11 amendments that he called for as a way to fix our broken federal government. Governor Abbott put forth a plan that had 9 amendments here, and what we have here is the Liberty amendments on the left, the Texas Plan amendments on the right. But you notice only 2 of these amendments match up between the 2 lists. So between Governor Abbott and Mark Levin, we have 18 unique calls for a constitutional convention. You know, are these the right number? Should there be more or should there be less? You know, what is the right number? See, that's part of the issues we get into when we start talking Article 5 convention. When calling for a limited Article 5 convention, each of the 34 states will have to agree which amendments need to be placed before the state legislature for a call for a convention. So if we made a call for just a balanced budget, you can see those match up pretty well and they could go across the states. So how long will it take for this to happen? There's already been 436 calls for an Article 5 convention among state legislatures dating back to November 14, 1788. I mean, this is right after the Constitution was signed. They were already calling for a constitutional convention. And Virginia was the one leading that. I guess the Bill of Rights wasn't good enough. They wanted to do some more. These Article 5 applications were in vast majority limited to a specific issue for which none received the 2/3 required to activate Congress to call for a convention. 22 of these applications have been rescinded. It's unclear legally whether a state legislature can rescind the call for a constitutional convention. I don't know. That would have to be taken up to the Supreme Court, I suppose. My own sense would be, you know, I don't think one state legislature should be able to bind another state legislature for perpetuity. So that's where I would stand on that. Van Sickle-Bowie defined 5 classifications of state applications. And he did it in his book called A Lawful and Peaceful Revolution. And that's what we're talking about with Article 5. We want to do lawful, we want to be peaceful, but we want to change our government. That's how we do it. So his 5 classes of state legislature applications for Article 5 convention was Class 1, a call for a general convention with no motivating issue whatsoever. Class 2 was a call for a general convention with a separate statement, a proposed amendment, or explicit statement that the convention may consider other amendments proposed by these states. Class 3, a call for a general convention tied to a proposed amendment. Class 4, a call for a convention with language aimed to limit the convention to the issue presented. And Class 5, a call for a convention with language to rescind the application from consideration if any other topic is covered. So those are the 5 classifications that are pretty much accepted as the different classes of state law application calls for an amendment. You'll go to the next slide, please. As you see, this is Texas's history of voting for an Article 5 convention call. As you can see here, from 1899 to 1979, we've had 11 calls for an Article 5 convention that has been passed by our state legislature. As you can see, these are the different classes. Class 1 was a general one, and the majority of them are Class 3, limited to a specific proposed amendment. The majority of these things, well, actually, the last 2 are dealing with the federal budget. It's interesting that both these were done once in 1977 and once in 1979. Who was president in 1977 and 1979? There you go. Our economy was in a mess. And people turned to an Article 5 convention as a way to fix the federal government's failure to get a hold of its economy and its budget. That's why they passed that. Who was in charge of the Texas legislature in 1977?
Democrats.
Democrats, that's right. So they were out there, they were feeling the heat from the people that things were out of control, that Jimmy Carter wasn't getting the job done. So Texas Democrats were calling for an Article 5 convention to give themselves credibility in the state of Texas on to deal with the budget issues. So you got to remember, it's not just because there are different reasons for calling for an Article 5. Democrats got behind the balanced budget because they felt like they were losing because of Jimmy Carter, and eventually they did. Texas turned red, it became Republican through and through, but a large part of that was because of the failures of Jimmy Carter. This was an effort to try to plug that hole and stem that tide. You notice there's not been another call for an Article 5 convention for 37 years. You'll want to flip the next slide, please. So, why do people oppose an Article 5 convention? 38 state legislatures or state conventions is a pretty high bar for ratification. As we've seen, getting to an Article 5 convention with a 34 state bar has never been successful. We've never had Article 5. 34 states have never agreed to it. Even back in 1789, when Virginia called for a state convention, or Article 5 convention, when there were only 13 states, they still couldn't get a 34 states of 9 out there. There are 31, well, this is a little dated since the election, so you'll have to bear with me. There were 31 Republican-controlled legislatures. There's more today. There are 11 Democratic-controlled legislatures. There's less today. And there are 8 split legislatures. The odds of an absolutely horrendous leftist progressive amendment or amendments is not feasible. So remember, it only takes 13 states to block ratification of a proposed amendment. So if you're afraid of a leftist, progressive, runaway convention states, it's not going to happen. That's not a reason to fear an Article 5 convention. In fact, with the easier path of congressionally proposed amendments, there's only been 27 successful amendments to the Constitution at all. So with all our 200 and some years of existence under our Constitution, we've only been able to do a constitutional amendment 27 times, and that's through the easy path, and I say easy, rhetorically, of using the Congress proposed amendments and state ratification. So the other issue of the federal government ignoring amendment, the other issue is the federal government ignoring an amended Constitution as they do today. I have to say Obama has set the bar pretty low on, avoiding the Constitution and not following it. I would also have to say the Republican Party has been his handmaiden in this effort of disregarding the Constitution. However, since the Liberty Amendments and Texas Plan push power to the states, it may not matter when the federal government does if the states are constitutionally empowered to act. What this says is, even if the federal government is oppressing the people, oppressing the states, exercising federal tyranny wherever, Article 5 is the people's final tool to try to rectify this as a peaceful way to change our government by amending our Constitution. Now, if the people, and we'll talk about 34 states, to propose, but 38, if 38 states ratified a proposed amendment to the Constitution, and the federal government did not follow it, that would be grounds for resolution. I do not think our federal government could withstand the will of the people that much. That's too many states, that's too many people, all pushing for one thing. And we've seen how hard it is to do this. So this is what I consider one of the final tools to correct our government before you have an armed conflict. That's a little harsh there, but ultimately that's what we mean. You'll flip the next slide, please.
Yep.
Okay, so we have an Article 5 convention. So what's our problem? We're trying to get over a hurdle we haven't reached in 228 years. Getting 34 states to trigger the congressional call for a constitutional convention would be like the dog that chased the cars. What would we do when we caught it? As you can see here, There is no plan or guidebook for convening an Article 5 convention. Now, other folks and some in this room have proposals and plans and ways to do these things, and that's fine. But just remember, it's all 50 states, well, acting, or at least 34 of them, acting together in concert to get this thing going. So it's not just any one state. It is a massive undertaking. Number two, Congress is in charge. They get to set a lot of the ground rules. That could be a problem, especially with the Congresses we've seen in the recent past. Here's a brief list of issues concerning convening an Article 5 convention. How soon will Congress organize and convene the convention after a legitimate list of 34 states have approved the call for one? Who in Congress will be in charge of organizing and planning a convention? How do the Senate and the House share or divide their responsibilities? Would a joint select committee from both chambers of Congress need to be impaneled? What would be the partisan issues to be resolved on that? Just think how hard that would be. I mean, we had Americans die in Benghazi. Look at the committee hearings that we had on that. You know, it's just a mess. Congress will have to authorize funds to pay for it. How many delegates from each state will be allowed to participate in the convention? There's no rule book, remember? Who picks the delegates? Do the state legislatures or state conventions? Does Congress get to pick the manner in which the delegates are chosen? How long will the state have to pick or select their delegations once they're authorized to do so? Who would chair the convention? Would it be from the Congress or from the delegation? Does Congress have a role in convention once it's called? Once it's gaveled into session? We don't know that. All that stuff has to be discussed, planned, and decided on, and ultimately voted on. Under what bylaws or charter will the Article 5 convention operate? Why doesn't anyone talk about how long this process will take? You hear folks like Abbott and Levin and many, many others talk about the Article 5, but never really hear them talk about the process and what it would take, the mechanics of holding that convention. That's the tough part. I mean, forget about getting over the hump of getting enough states to call on a single or multiple issues that they all 34 agree with. But then once you get it, this is some of the challenges you're facing. Go to the next slide, please. So, we've seen there's many challenges there. So who are the Article 5 convention delegates? You know, since there's no guidebook, you know, this becomes a really big issue. Some have suggested that each state have 3 delegates representing each state. Whereas each state has only 1 vote, a majority, 2 is required to make that state's position known and to place it exposed accordingly. That's kind of like a Continental Congress, I think, you know, at least the stuff I've seen. Thus, the convention will have 150 delegates, not counting the alternates, and it is not known if some delegates will serve new roles, convention chair, secretary, committee assignment, etc., in addition to their state roles. Others have suggested a more representational approach be had, whereas each state sends as many delegates as it has senators and representatives. This is your proportional convention. This would increase the number of delegates to the convention to 535 delegates, you know, your 435 representatives plus your 100 senators. It is not known if these delegates would vote individually or as a state delegation. Others want us to use an electoral college model for allocating state votes. You know, see, it gets a little bit more complicated when you start looking at the mechanics of it. Whether it's by 3 or 38, Texas is 36 reps plus 2 senators, who decides who the individual delegates will be? Would the state legislature simply select governor, lieutenant governor, and speaker to represent the Texas delegation? My God, I hope not. You know, would the state legislature form a joint select committee of both chambers to select and nominate individuals as delegates? Would the Congress mandate state delegate conventions to select the delegates? How would the members of the Texas legislature be held accountable for their delegate selection? All those things we would have to consider once we got into the process of an Article 5 convention. You know, and if we're calling for something, say balanced budget or outlawing abortion or some other thing that is very near and dear to conservative hearts, what kind of noise do you think the Democratic Party will make? What sort of fights and opposition that we will face because of that? You know, and think outside of Texas for a minute. What about Massachusetts, California, New Hampshire? How do you think those people would be coming to this thing and voting and looking at it? Now, we established that we're already over the hurdle where we've called for that thing, but don't think that those states run by Democratic governors and Democratic legislatures wouldn't send folks to try to sabotage the state convention. So you got to consider that also. You know, and how would these delegates at this convention receive their input from their state? Would they be getting directions from the state legislatures, or would they be free to vote their conscience? You know, we have the Electoral College right now deciding, you know, going to cast their vote December 19th for President Trump, President-elect Trump. We have an elector who has become faithless, Chris Spurn, up in, I guess, the Dallas area. He's refusing to cast a vote as the people of Texas voted. You know, and there's no recourse for that. There's not really anything we can do because we don't bind our electors in the Electoral College. Would we have the same thing with our delegates at a convention of states? Something else you have to consider. The state legislature would have to put rules on these delegates to make sure they did what the people of Texas wanted. Next slide. Why an Article 5 Constitutional Convention won't solve today's problems. And this is where, even though I'm in favor of the process, I don't think it's going to work today. The Republican establishment knows that they are losing the conservative base of the Republican Party. In fact, the conservative base overrode the Republican establishment and put Donald Trump into office. The Tea Party movement rose up in 2010 and elected Republicans to fix the problems in America and to fight back against the progressives led by Obama. They didn't. Republicans chose Romney in 2012 and conservatives stayed home. 2014, the Republican House Majority Leader was defeated in a primary by a political novice. In 2015, the Republican Speaker of the House was proposed by a group of conservative congressmen. 2016, an unashamed populist running against a rigged system was chosen as Republican presidential candidate and eventually president-elect by the United States of America. Consequently, Republicans needed to find a way to polish their conservative credentials without risking the status quo. That way was to embrace the concept of an Article 5 convention. Remember the financial disaster that was Jimmy Carter's presidency? Texas Democrats were under so much pressure, they called for an Article 5 convention twice to balance the federal budget. The Texas Republican establishment has chosen to go all in and called for an Article 5 convention in order to misdirect the base from issues like gay marriage, gender identity issues, religious freedom, etc. This is, after almost a decade of funding every Obama administration, funding the Obama administration, or retreating from every fight and surrendering every single time, after finding no issue worthy of standing their ground and shutting everything down, is it any wonder that the Republican leadership has lost credibility with its base? I think, even though I do support the process of Article 5, I feel like I'm being played when I hear Governor Abbott and Meckler and Tom Meckler and others in the Texas establishment call for an Article 5. I do not think they're serious. I think this is a way for them to say, we're one of you, even though they don't think it's ever going to happen. Next slide, please. Governor Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Patrick, Republican Party of Texas Chairman Meckler, and an overwhelming number of establishment Republicans have joined forces with the conservative grassroots. They have promoted an Article 5 convention in articles, interviews, legislative priorities, and books. With their support, the RPT has placed Article 5 language in the 2016 platform. The Republican incumbents are starting to run on their support for Article 5 convention. As always, Governor Abbott is finding ways to fundraise and profit off this issue. That man is an expert at this stuff. Well, if the grassroots support an Article 5 convention, isn't it great the Republican establishment has got behind our issue? Not all grassroots are behind Article 5. There is a lot of opposition because fear of the federal government, fear of government, that prevents them from embracing an Article 5 convention. Many in the grassroots believe they are being played, as I do, by the Republican establishment. Remember, Democrats played a very similar game back in the 70s when financial crisis was brought on by the Carter presidency. Think about your history when you think about today. Everything's a circle. Nothing is new under the sun. What has gone before will come again. I feel this has come again. If you'll slide, please. So, should the grassroots support an Article 5 convention? How can anybody who loves to defend the Constitution be against a constitutionally prescribed process? You know, that's the first test right there. The real question is, do you think an Article 5 convention is the answer to our nation's problems? Have we discussed the addition to gathering the required number of state legislatures applications for a limited convention with the many challenges holding the first Article 5 convention, constitutional convention in history, in the state ratification process? You know, it would appear we'd be years away from a solution. If everything went our way, we could start getting state legislatures to agree on just one thing. How many years do you think it would be down the road before that was ratified and placed in our Constitution? Do you think at the pace of things that have gone on today, I mean, look at where we are from when Obama started his term to where he's gone. He's fixing to get out. 8 years. Look at the change in our country, the change in our nation. Is this truly the solution to fix everything? I'm not saying that we shouldn't keep doing it. I would love a balanced budget amendment. I would love constitutional term limits. There are many, many things I would support Article 5. But do I think we could stop the roller coaster? I feel like our best chance was what we just did. The people said, we want change. They took a gamble, and trust me, this is a gamble on Donald Trump. You know, and so we rolled the dice. We're going to see whether it pans out over the next 4 years. But over the next 4 years, we will have action done. Things will be changed. Change will come fast and change will come furiously. Sometimes it will be good, sometimes not so good. But it's not going to be a years-long process. And that's why I'm saying, you know, should we get behind this? I think on some level, yes. But on some levels, is it going to solve the problems that we're all up here as activists today to solve? Next slide, please. What should our next step in the support of Article 5 convention be? If Abbott is truly serious about Article 5 convention, he should take the initiative to do what no other state governor has tried to do in the past, to formulate a charter for doing a Article 5 convention. Go ahead and lay it on the table. Bring the rock, okay? Governor Abbott should begin the process of consulting with the other 49 states to form an interstate compact that would address the issues and problems challenging the implementation of Article 5 Constitutional Convention. Such an interstate compact could provide state pre-coordination strategy with respect to deciding on specific limited proposed amendments. This compact can make an Article 5 proposed amendments a topic of National Conference of State Legislatures yearly meeting. They could discuss this every year until they got a sufficient number of people, state legislatures, agreeing on something. Instruct Congress regarding the actual call of a convention for proposing amendments. Remember I said Congress is in charge? Interstate compact preempts Congress's authority. If Congress approves this kind of interstate compact, that is right under the Constitution as supreme law of the land. That would be a binding on the Congress and everybody else for this thing. Formalize delegate selection for the states and settle the number of delegates. Go ahead, let's get that out of the way up front so that's not a question later. And formalize the bylaws for such a convention. Ultimately, merely proposing constitutional amendments without an implementing strategy is just talk. That seeks to take advantage of the national crisis demonstrated in unconstitutional actions by the federal government and a breakdown of the rule of law across the land. So this is pretty much the end of my discussion here. I just wanted to show you a little history. I want to show you some of the challenges, and then I want to put it in context. Is this what it's going to take to solve today's problems? Many folks are looking for a savior, whether it's a convention of states or whether it was Donald Trump. They want that magic bullet. We want action now. We want to change things. We want to fix our country. We want to go back to being a law-abiding, Christian, conservative, leading nation. You know, we don't want the government telling us how big our toilets can be or what kind of light bulbs to use. We want to be free. We want to be in liberty once again. I do not fault anybody for going down this path. I think it is a good path, and I think it's good for solving long-term structural problems in this country. But if you're looking for a short-term fix, like it's being pushed by Abbott, that's it. This is something that will take a long time, a lot of dealing with. So I'd like to end my presentation and thank y'all for coming. And I will take whatever questions I can do. I'm not a constitutional expert. I'm just an activist who did a little studying and figured let's have that discussion here locally. Yes, sir.
I wasn't aware of the 1977 to 79. What was the result of those actions by the state of Texas?
Will you
Result
repeat
of
the,
actions?
repeat the questions when
The
you...
question was, what was the result of those legislative calls for a balanced budget amendment by the state of Texas? Still on the books. Those things are still out there. They've never been rescinded, but they've never been acted on. Call for a balanced budget amendment in the 1970s got the most support by state legislatures for a convention of state. I believe 23 state legislatures, less than half, but still significantly more than any other issue, banded together and called for balancing the federal budget through an Article 5 convention. You know, again, even as bad as it was in the Carter years, they couldn't get a majority of states, much less two-thirds, to agree to a proposed amendment to balance the federal budget. So that's what's happened. It is still out there, still on the books. You know, and in fact, I forgot to mention this when I showed the history of Texas. Out of the 11 times we've called for a balanced budget amendment, 8 of them are unique, and the other 3 times were multiple calls for the same thing. Yes, sir.
Follow-up question. Texas or any other state, what attempt to call an Article 5, what's the furthest we've ever gotten?
When you say furthest we've ever gotten, what do you mean by
I
that?
don't know that it has ever been successful.
Most progress toward it.
Most progress,
The most progress we ever had was the balanced budget amendment. 23 state legislatures said, let's have one. Now, I think that has been rescinded by a couple of states, but that's as far as it gets. There is no more, what was the next thing? If you do not have 34 state legislatures calling for a Article 5 constitutional convention, it does not happen, it does not go anywhere, it stays on the law books. Yes, sir.
Can you go to your slide that suggests that Congress controls the rules? I'd just like to make a comment on it by name.
Okay, go back to the
There's a lot of things in the Constitution that are not explicitly called out, right? And traditionally what we would do is we research the founding era documentation to understand what did our founders mean in their time frame. So your point here where Congress controls it, they call it, but it's pretty much just an administrative task. And in that era, there was about 40 documented intrastate conventions of states. And in each of those states, they actually define how they're going to choose their delegates, how they're going to limit their commissions, and of course, every one of those conventions shows the result. And never was Congress involved other than choosing a time and a place, and there was never a runaway convention. So there is a long historical, legal, defensible precedent of holding conventions. So that part, I appreciate everything, most of the other content in your presentation, but if you do the research, you'll understand that part of Congress control. I mean, think about it, right? That part of Article 5, of adding the states, giving them the power to also propose amendments, right? There's no power in Article 5 right here that gives the President, Supreme Court, or Congress to ratify. All that power is given to the states. What was not in the original draft of Article 5 was giving to the states the power to also propose amendments. That was the only thing that's changed here. But to think that they're going to add that clause, and it was a unanimous vote, not a single dissenting vote on adding that clause, allowing the states to also propose amendments, but to think that they're going to add that and yet allow their natural enemy, Congress, to then control the rules of the convention is not true.
Well, and this gentleman has been involved in the Convention of States way longer than I have, and he's probably got a lot more historical reference than I do. However, you know, I do see where it says, as one mode or the other of ratification may be proposed by the Congress. You're right. They have done things in the past And if you look at it from a historical perspective of what was doing when they first wrote the Constitution, that's one way of interpretation. But you know that they would interpret this in today's climate and environment of politics and what's going on. Now, it does not explicitly say the states can run all this stuff. And even if you took
But
Congress,
that's what all the history shows. There's nothing else that people go call on someone.
but there's also never been a successful Article 5. So
But
those were all starts.
Conventions.
But they were starts, and they were never actually went through the whole process. So that I would listen to him as equally as what I'm saying. You know, I would just say that from what I read, I did not see where there's anything that the states would be. I mean, not that they wouldn't be empowered; they can be. In fact, you know, I look at this and I understand your point on the convention of states, how they're selecting their delegates and all that stuff. But you know, you start looking at, they all have to be kind of sort of the same. You know, Texas can't throw out 3 delegates and California do some proportional representation.
That's not true. There's history on this. If California wants to send 500 people, that's each state determines who they're going to send, how they're going to qualify. And in the founding era, if you didn't follow, you took it on. If you didn't follow that condition, you could get a rope around your neck. Now, we're probably not going to do that today, but there would be serious jail time, serious financial penalties, and we as citizens, our voice can be heard on that delegate bill. Right? It was filed this past Tuesday. So if you're concerned, as I am also concerned about Joe Strauss or someone like that representing us, get your voice heard. But that delegate bill, again, there's plenty of history on conventions, how people chose them, how they limited their scope. And there's never been a runaway convention. So,
And I'm not saying this would be a runaway
well,
convention.
and part of what I'm seeing in some of the slides are the history on Article 5, when they really started to come up in the 60s and 70s, was a result of serious conservatives in those decades trying to make this happen. What happened is Charles Black and Lawrence Tribe did research, and they promoted some of the fear tactics that you're seeing up here, right? So again, runaway convention, can't control the delegates, all that's it's liberal research that's been refuted by constitutional lawyers.
And as I said, I do not believe that there will be a runaway constitutional convention. And you know what? I also accept your point that there are solutions out there that would have to be worked. I'm just saying that they would have to be worked by 50 states, 50 different states with different ideas. And I know there's some history back there, but I will say to you that yes, if you work hard enough at it, you can make it happen. So, but I'd like to get to another question.
I'm saying this is not hard work.
But I'd like to
heavy lifting. There's no question.
let me get another question here. Sean?
Hey, sorry if I missed it, you covered this in an instant, but when you talk about the delegates being selected by the states, is there a process in place in Texas to select those delegates or no? Okay, so my understanding is that it would be up to the will of the Texas legislature? Potentially,
Maybe.
possibly, is that?
Could be. It could be. They
Each
could
state
vote for a
determines
convention.
So I guess if you say each state determines, then what's the process to determine it? Through the legislature?
Yes, and there's a bill, Phil King and Brian Burgle. So Phil King in the House has just put a bill forth.
Who are they proposing to be the delegate to this convention?
Which house is this being? Is this Texas House or the U.S. House?
Yeah, Texas.
Oh, it's all state legislatures.
Yeah, the legislature determines the delegate selection process.
And they passed legislation to do this. Right, so I mean, there's time between now and whenever the country gets to 34
Okay, because
states.
we have a lot of, okay, so here's my standpoint as an activist. We have a lot of work to do in the legislature to ensure we get a fair process of selecting delegates before that ever takes place. Because I don't really trust our legislature at the moment.
No.
And I don't guess a lot of people in this room don't either.
I agree with you. If you want to get to that end state, there's a lot of in-between states. That's right. Because what you have today is Abbott and Meckler and the RPT calling for a constitutional convention.
Let me ask you, is this a campaign point or is it actually serious about this?
Well,
There's like 100,000 people in this state. This is just not the leadership.
but we've covered that. What I'm saying is today, right today, we've only got planks of the Republican Party platform. We've got a book by Governor Abbott, and we have a set of legislative priorities. That's what we have today. Nothing's been passed. Nothing's in writing yet. Nothing's been done. It is all maybe planning and in work, but it's not done yet.
Before the book came out, before January the Texas plan came out, in 2015, HER 77 was put on the floor and it passed the House. So there is prior legislation.
Didn't pass
and the
the
grass,
Senate.
it didn't get out of committee. You're right, but you just told me that it was Governor Abbott and Dan Patrick. Before they even came and spoke about it, our group didn't know that Governor Abbott was going to do, but there was already bills, already
Oh,
legislation.
I'm not saying that
That's what I thought.
there's a large element of grassroots that wants this. And I agree. Like I say, I agree with it for a long-term solution to some of our most serious problems. So I'm not saying that they invented it. Not at all.
If Governor Abbott had a book come out during the convention that was already in process, the legislature already knew about it, and it would have been part of his internal priorities to get
Well,
moving.
what I'm saying is, for
What I heard is
you're
the same
going
thing
that
started.
way.
No, this was.
Well, let me get another question in here, and we can keep going. Yes, sir.
Well, just two comments. The Convention of States folks I discovered we've already stirred up some of the Democrats or something, because I'm already getting campaignforliberty.com or .org, and it's saying that this is going to back to slavery and all kinds of things, and so they're trying to really cut it off at the gap. And the other thing is, this was an excellent summary that you put up there for some thought-provoking thinking. I appreciate the work you did on that. That was good.
Yes, sir.
First of all, I'd like to commend you on, I thought that was a really well presented presentation, and I learned some things from it, and I appreciate the balance of it. I'm with the Convention of States also. I've been working with Bill for a couple of years on this. And, my observation is that, of the people in this room, it looked like by survey, most of us want to press forward with this. You see it as an avenue for, practical action. The question is, how do we balance all our values into something that we don't like? Now, all of us here are basically involved in grassroots press. We are engaging our legislators. There's a lot of disparate factions within conservatism. Some of us seem to be at each other's throats. But what I've been suggesting is that, first of all, on a practicality of seeing something happen sooner rather than later, the effort to make sure that all these things aggregate in their state application, there's a functional address of that practicality to try to get that to happen sooner. I think that your notion of having a compact that is looking at long-term management of how legislatures would coordinate with each other over a longer-term period is a very interesting idea. I hadn't really...
some of that is occurring, maybe not as formally as you'd like, but through ALEC and through some of the caucus stuff that we have done is actually getting intrastate states engaged on the rulemaking. When we ran a simulation in September, we invited 3 legislators from every state in the country and went and they looked at the rules ahead of time, and those rules were established from precedent. These are rules that other state conventions had in founding era time frame. They looked at and they ran a convention. And
Well, I hope I didn't give the impression that nobody was doing anything, because that is not true. There are lots of citizens out amongst this land who are trying to make a difference. They're trying to fix things. Convention of States people are earnest. They're patriots. They're wanting to do the right thing through the right way. I give them all that credit, and I don't know everything that goes on. There may be folks out there doing exactly what he's saying, and I have no reason to doubt that. But until we get something done in writing, passed legislatively, that says this is how it's going to be when that happens, we're still just planning, we're still scheming, we're still developing what it is we want to do. There's no reason anybody in this room should be offended at anybody else. That should not be on the same page, because we all are. We already are. We want to do the best thing for this country. And I believe that some of that could be through a Convention of States, depending on what problem it is you're trying to fix. Others, like myself, I'm more interested in what the hell's going on today and trying to come up with some quick solutions to do that. thank God our job is a lot easier with this last election, and we're not having to face an even more repressive, more out of control federal government than what we've been having. So with that said, I think we're kind of all in agreement here that we do believe that an Article 5 Convention of States is a legitimate process in order to change our Constitution. I agree with that. I support it. I also believe that there are other things that we need to do, and it's just manage your expectations. That's pretty much the purpose of today's briefing, was to say, understand what it is that you're looking at here. And I gave you very brief, very 50,000 foot level what's going on. I know others here have way more broader insight into what is actually going on than I, but I'm just here to say this is before. Yes, ma'am.
My question is, if not this, what? Tell me what you suggest. I mean, maybe even in addition to this, what do you suggest would get quicker
Well, see,
results?
we're so lucky. Okay, the question was, if not this, then what? Well, fortunately, that is a question that really doesn't have to be asked, because we can do this. We can keep doing this all day long and still maybe at the end of the day manage to come out with some real reform to our government and our Constitution. Like I said, balanced budgets, federal, congressional term limits, etc. Those are all good things. We don't have to do anything in lieu of it. We have to just keep doing the same things we do. We still have to go to our state legislators. We still have to go to the committee hearings. We have to fight for specific legislation. We have to support good candidates in elections. All that. Our democracy isn't built on silver bullets. Our democracy is built on the people. And it is the people being activists and whatever their talents lie, doing as much as they can when they have to, that will get us through the day. That's what we're saying. And one of the reasons I took this on was because I saw some acrimony in the grassroots. Those who said, my God, you'll destroy our country if you have an Article 5. There's others who said, this is the only way to save our country. And those are two extremes that are not even in reality. The answer is, it's more in the middle. It's part of the toolbox. Yes, ma'am.
I want to approach this from a different track altogether.
Sure.
I have 5 children, and I have 5 grandchildren. And I don't want to leave this country to them in the condition it's in. And this is one way that I can get involved and help change the direction this country's going. And Mark Meckler said something about who decides. It's something he uses a lot. Who decides? Do we decide, or does the government decide? And if we decide, we should get involved. And if you're concerned about how the selection of delegates goes, get involved, sign the petition, you'll get information, and we'll move on.
That's right. He says there's already been legislation passed in the House. Well, go dig it back up. You got a new legislative session coming on.
Right.
Go find a champion in the Senate. Say the House already voted for this last time. We need somebody in the Senate side to do it.
It's Larry Taylor.
Okay. so we keep doing those things. And whether you're working specifically with the Convention of States folks, or you're working on your legislator, you can still advance the ball. Yes, ma'am.
Dale, to answer the lady back there's question a little better, not better, but additionally.
Okay.
She asked, what else can we do? Well, we all believe strongly in nullification, that the governor should stand up and nullify these federal laws that are unconstitutional. Dale has been very active, and he and I were at my state rep's office just a few weeks ago working on border state compacts. There are other quicker modes of getting this done. We all agree with what Dale said, that yes, the Convention of States is constitutional, and it's something that long-term may work out very well. In the meantime, we got to stop what they're doing where we can.
Well, I'm an old jet fighter mechanic. I'm a mechanical engineer, and one truism that has always been, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So in answer to your question, we need a big full toolbox of different things, wrenches and hammers and screwdrivers, and do what it takes to advance our cause of liberty even further along the way. There are no bad tools as far as I can see. And an Article 5 convention is in the Constitution. Anybody who says that that's a bad process, I'll go, okay, tell me what else in the Constitution you don't approve of, you know? It's there for a reason. Now, it's hard, and it should be hard. We shouldn't be able to willy-nilly, on a whim, just be able to go out there and overthrow our government. But they give us a way to do it if we need to. And that is what's important. That makes us who we are. And it doesn't make us a tyranny. It doesn't make us subjects. It makes us citizens.
Yeah, let me follow up Suzanne. Another one that, I mean, what's preventing the governor from next week nullifying the TSA program? I mean, it went through the House.
Who has fought the federal government more than any other governor in our nation's history on states' rights? Look at the Garcia case. Look at the Garcia case. Look at the Garcia case. The federal government told the state of Texas how they're going to pay transit authority employees in San Antonio. The dissenting opinion in that case said the majority decision in that case is a mockery of federalism and basically threw states' rights to the curb.
So what's preventing notification of the TSA? I mean, what's preventing him next week from the governor signing and say, hey, it's going to be a misdemeanor if you grope our citizens?
Truly, that's off subject. And if we want nullification, we can have another lunch and learn on nullification.
This is one aspect.
But you're right. It is another tool in the
Look at all
toolbox.
the cases you're fighting. You're reacting.
Yeah, Sean.
Look, how many campaign seasons have we had to endure where our representatives and our governors and lieutenant governors have promised to repeal Obamacare? That has been a plank in their campaign promises for several cycles now, and we really haven't seen anything. We've had opportunities for nullification and imposition. We proposed to the legislature. I had a friend personally write one of them. They shot it down because they didn't want to take it on. Now, the only problem I have with this is, Dale, you're absolutely correct. This is a tool of the belt. This is a legitimate tool that Congress put in place for us to use. But I also see it being used as a campaign tool because I've seen the same promises on other issues over the past 3 or 4 cycles, and nothing is changing. Now, the only bad tools are the people that go along with people that are using them in an improper way.
Right. That's where we came in.
Now, if they want to be serious about this, they need to lay some stuff out, some more structure. You know, it's like Trump getting up there and saying, well, I got this great plan. Okay, well, what is it?
I agree. You know, put an
This is a big
words
deal.
of action.
He really can't lose in this situation though from a campaign standpoint because he can offer to pie in the sky and strive for it and still be a hero and not get it.
I agree. I mean, calling for it's one thing.
But
And then
doing it's
fundraising
another.
off is another, you know.
Making it happen is another.
You're right. And it's like what we said. Start putting the plan into place in Texas. Go work with the other states. As a governor, you know, you made money off it. Go see what it is. Yes, sir.
And along that subject line, I would like everybody to consider, if you haven't looked at the Convention of States website and project, you know, it's the advantage of riding this horse, I think, is that it's really in place in such a well-developed way right now that it's a vehicle that get some action done sooner rather than later. Things like nullifications and contacts. I view nullification as being something that would be a later stage last resort than using Article 5. That's my,
Last resort.
Nullification occurs today.
Explain why I would be wrong.
What's preventing today notification of one little thing? I mean, what?
Let's go.
Wait a minute. Let's just not go off on the nullification thing. Granted, nullification occurs today. Federal marijuana laws are being ignored by states all across this country. So nullification does exist today.
It's a slightly different animal. We're going to try to nullify something like GSA, which requires some sort of uniformity and standard.
Exactly.
Not the legislature, actually.
But let's stick to the subject at hand because we're running out of time. And if there are any more questions on the Convention of States, either myself or one of the fine folks here can answer it. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was wondering, are your slides available, or you can email them to everybody who signed this sheet, or can we?
Do we have a sign sheet on there?
Yes, we do. Can
I
everybody
will
sign
send
it?
I will send it to you.
Well, make sure that
Maybe you don't want to share with me.
Yeah, I will send out anybody who's on that list with email address. I will send my charts out to you with my notes.
Okay. That was a really good presentation.
Okay.
Or they can contact you on Facebook
Or you can contact me on Facebook.
because we have Facebook Live going on.
Okay.
I don't know if they're all the slides on Facebook.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, just email them.
Okay, I will do that. Anything else? Thank you very much for coming. I'm glad you attended. I hope you learned a little.